Hello and welcome to TO Talk, the UKTC podcast, where we sit down with the people behind the scenes at the UK's biggest events and talk all things Warhammer and Warhammer events. Today, we're taking a little bit of a step back. We're going to be looking at where the UKTC has come from in the past 10 years and the Warhammer community in general, and the vision that we envision for Warhammer in the UK in the next 10 years, and how we can look to support that, and not just as the UKTC, but as a wider community and all of that. I'll be joined by Zach Becker, the founder and director of UKTC, as he reflects on his last 10 years with Warhammer events and where he would like to see the hobby get to and his vision for the future. Hello and welcome to the TO Talk podcast, a UKTC podcast where we look behind the scenes a little bit and have conversations with the biggest TO in the world currently. That would be Zach. So, for those of you that don't know him, Zach is the founder and director of the UKTC. Zach, I'll let you explain what the UKTC is for people that haven't heard of it.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me on. Biggest TO in the world is probably not a title I can claim anymore, given that there's four of us running it. So obviously, the company is the biggest organized play provider, is probably how I would describe it. We are an organization that runs massive 40k events and Warhammer and tabletop gaming events more generally. I obviously founded the company, so when we were just me, myself, and I, then I had the title of TO. But back then we weren't the biggest in the world, obviously. I think there's a couple of interesting points in terms of like how you measure scale and those sorts of things. So people through the door, biggest events, those sorts of things. So that's sort of what we are, what we do. I imagine most people watching it are familiar with that, so I won't sort of belabor the point too much.
Yeah, perfect. So, the UKTC is turning 10 this year. It's been 10 years since the first LGT in 2016, and we've got our 10th anniversary coming up for that. In that time, obviously, massive changes have changed to the Warhammer community and the competitive community. And this episode is going to be focusing on the next 10 years or the vision and where you see competitive Warhammer going, what you think UKTC's part is going to be in that. Because at the moment, it feels like the experience for 40k play can be pretty hit or miss, sort of depending where you live. You know, if you have a local group or if you have if you've just moved somewhere new, how do you find games? Is it luck? Is it skill? So, what do you see, or I guess we'll start with how do you see the competitive scene developing the next years, and then we'll touch on some of the key things that the UKTC are going to be doing to help that, and how you want the community to grow along with the tournament scene as well, I guess.
Yeah, I think we're very much at a pivot point in 40k. I think pretty much anyone that's been around long enough can identify that things are changing, and they're changing quite rapidly. Mostly for the best, right? Like everyone is loving the game more than ever. There are pockets of people here and there that prefer third edition or whatever. So there's always going to be some sort of bifurcation of opinions about whether change is for the good. But we're seeing a more popular game with a more successful company in Games Workshop behind it, which means more resources and more growth. So I think to begin with, we just need to acknowledge that things are changing, and everyone needs to adapt with that. Now, obviously, we are at a short-term pivot point too, with new edition coming up. So there's always technical changes and those sorts of things that happen around summer and the 3-year cycle. Or so we would assume. Obviously, nothing's been formally announced yet, but that's what everyone is sort of guessing. In terms of your question, right? So 10 years is obviously a big milestone in any walk of life. But I think it's probably helpful to people if I sort of paint the picture about what the Warhammer world was like 10 years ago. Because a lot of people are new, right? They don't appreciate how far we've come, because they don't appreciate what the starting point was. So let me sort of describe the scene as I walked into it before we set up, and then I can tell you a little bit about where I think the scene is going in the next 10 years. So I got back into Warhammer in my mid-20s in 2016, 15, 2015, I think it was. And when I left Warhammer as a 13-year-old, I was playing in my local church community hall, I think it was. We had a sort of 12-person a week club. We had a 30-person twice per year tournament, and Adepticon had just started. It was in year one. That was quite a healthy scene. Our tournament had traveling players come from all across the south of England, and it was a 30-player event. So that's what success looked like when I was 13. When I got back into the hobby in my mid-20s, things had grown, but they'd also stagnated a little bit. So we had tournaments coming out of Element Games, Caledonian. They were branded under a Caledonian brand, which were run by Tim King, who's still in the hobby space. And they were around sort of 80 people, fixed by capacity, so they would sell out, but they were the biggest events in the country, considered to be very, very competitive. Everyone there was competitive, and they were 80 players in size. And that was considered very large, biggest in the country. I got started because I basically, I lived in the south. There were no big events. Element Games was obviously in Manchester. I didn't drive back then, so getting up there was a faff. And, I was young and energetic and wanted to do more for my local community than was being provided. We had
Yeah.
a young and very healthy club at the time in London, which has now grown to be the biggest club in the world. I think they've got like 3,000 members or something ridiculous. So,
That is that's
yeah.
more than I can count on one hand, that's for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, exactly. So, my very good friend Pete sort of took that in one direction. My sort of community endeavor was running tournaments. I was a competitive player and I wanted more accessible tournaments to me. And that's how we got started. Now, Element Games back then was not as nice a venue as it is now. Now it's a fine place to spend the weekend, but back then I think there was one toilet that worked. There was a hole in the roof above it, so you got rained on if you were sitting down on the loo in the mornings. There was it was -4 degrees, I think, downstairs, which was quite an amusing top table experience when I was playing competitively, and I was on the top tables, which was a sheet thrown over some boxes, and that was the competitive experience. So we wanted to upgrade things a little bit. When preparing the boards for the first ever event we ran, we realized that we didn't want to have lots of textured MDF. So a playing table back then was a 6x4 piece of MDF, maybe with some sand and paint on it. Some tournaments had 2 or 3 mats for the top tables. We didn't do that. I was the first event in the world to put a fat mat on every single table. So I went out, bought them all, and that was the new standard. And over time, obviously, every other event updated. Now, if you don't run an event with a fat playing mat on, something's gone wrong,
Yeah,
right?
I think if I turned up and there were no mats, it would be a
Big thing.
what's
So
going on sort of
yeah, I
question.
mean that wasn't the case 10 years ago. So we started
Okay.
that. And then with that, standardized terrain wasn't a thing. Lots of tournaments just didn't have enough terrain. So we contacted a game producer. We got some terrain. Obviously, then it wasn't even standardized. It took us till year 3 before we sort of started pushing the standardized terrain narrative. That was inspired heavily from my experience at Nova. Went over there. Nova used to be run by Mike Brandt, who's obviously now with Games Workshop, and they had standardized terrain. I was like, this is amazing. Like, you know what to expect. The terrain's been balanced by a competitive player. The gaming quality was higher as a result, and I came back to UK and brought that with me. We then pushed that heavily over a few years, and it got picked up more mainstream. So the UK sort of picked up the UKTC terrain as a thing. And took a couple of years, but eventually WTC got on board and started doing their own standardized terrain. So again, like, we think now as having this conversation about whose terrain maps are better. Aside from Nova in the States, once per year event, no one was doing it apart from us. So we sort of led the charge there at that point, which was eventually reflected by Games Workshop launching maps, which took a long time. So that wasn't the case when we started doing standardized terrain, and eventually WTC followed suit as well. So we're now in a very different situation in terms of event quality, in terms of what's provided, in terms of information and packs that are provided more widely. And that's to say nothing of the frequency and size of the events. As I mentioned earlier, 80 players was the biggest event in the country, and it was very, very competitive, hyper competitive event. We have very explicitly grown the events with a mass market perspective. We want Warhammer to be for everyone, and that's why we call it organized play rather than competitive play. Because although competitive play at the top tier happens at our events, we have the best players in the world playing every 2 weeks pretty much nowadays. But most people who come most of the time are coming because you can guarantee them 5 great games, and not because they really want to win the best
Yeah, so the
general.
main message there is UKTC events are for everybody. They are very accessible, no matter what level of skill you're at. That's the whole ethos. Is we have the competitive players that I think we've got the best meta in the world. I think we have some of the best players in the world, and they do attend the events, but it doesn't preclude anybody. Everybody can join. It is all about accessibility to the hobby, to the enjoyment, to the whole weekend, so that we can all
Yeah.
celebrate it because we all love the hobby and we all want to spend loads of time doing it. That's sort of one of the core parts of the UKTC mission. Then,
Yeah, exactly. And let me just clarify, it's not just UKT events that are for everyone. Warhammer's for everyone. Like, if you like this game, you love this hobby, and you want to express your enjoyment of the hobby through playing, then UKTC provides the infrastructure, which is the key word here, for you to play as much as possible. I find it personally much easier to buy a ticket and sign up to a link on BCP than to organize 5 games on 5 different Wednesdays. So for me, organized play is how I get games in. The competitive expression of the game follows that, but it isn't the core thing. Now, not everyone's the same, but I think a huge proportion of our attendees do love the events because we reduce the admin. We reduce the friction for them to play the game. Like, you turn up, your opponent's overview, you've got common behavioral expectations, and you can just play. Right. So in Magic, they have a phrase called "shuffle up and play." Right. Just get going. Right. You're here to play. You're not here to talk about stuff. Right. So that's what we're sort of providing. So that's the last 10 years, if you like. So we've got the biggest scene in the world. We've got, as we say, arbitrarily a very competitive scene at the top tiers. We've got a thriving scene in terms of the RTTs and locals, but that wasn't always the case. So real question now, what you asked was, where are we going? What are we doing in the next 10 years? Because I foresee there being more changes than the first 10 years. And that's really what our vision post recently was all about. What do we want 40K to look like in 10 years' time? How do we want people to engage with the hobby that unites us in, and how can we sort of get there? So we do have some more blog posts coming up which explains the sort of the what and the how, so to speak. The why is really more the topic of the vision. It's all very well saying we all love Warhammer, let's engage in a hobby together, but like, what does that actually translate to? So the vision is trying to sort of delineate that a bit. And we kind of basically see there being some problems that reduce your ability to engage in the hobby. So although the hobby is multifaceted, loads of people paint, loads of people do all the other social aspects, narrative hours, whatever. We're a gaming organization. Like, we engage in the hobby and by playing it. And we kind of looked at why we don't play as much as we would like. So one reason people don't play as much as like is they can't find opponents, they can't find places to play at the time in which they want to do it. Right? I want to play a game this Wednesday afternoon. How can I find somebody who wants to play a game this Wednesday afternoon? And how can I do that in 10 minutes rather than having to join lots of little groups and, hey mate, anyone want a game tonight? Planning weeks in advance. People are busy. People are getting busier and busier. Like, the world's getting more hectic. So we've got to solve that problem. Loads of people don't play as much as they like because they've got these things called jobs, and they need things these little things called pound
those
coins.
pesky things.
Yeah. So how can we solve that problem for the people that are really, really engaged and want to just literally play all day, every day? It's no secret to people that are following the top tier of the game that the people that spend more time practicing are better. So if we can remove that barrier for some people, obviously it will never be possible. Everyone's a professional player, but if you want to play full time, it should be a viable choice for you if you're good enough. So how can we solve that problem? There's loads of little things like that that we look at to basically say this is a speed bump, hurdle, obstacle, roadblocker of how much we play the game is not in alignment with how much we want to play the game. And the vision we have is for a world of Warhammer where those things that we've identified no longer exist. So we've solved those things, we've removed the blockers, and we've done so with tools, techniques, processes, procedures, resources that other people don't have available, and done so in a way that's sustainable. So we don't want to just solve the problem for tomorrow, we want to solve it permanently. And that's really where I see us going. And my vision for the future is a world where how much you play is a choice rather than a constraint.
Yeah. So to summarize it, you want it to be a place, or the hobby to be a place where it's not just going to a tournament every now and then. It's you're able to engage with the community, play as much as you would like, rather than only going to one event once a month because it's local to you. So um, and how you can progress yourself. And I think touching on that sort of professional sort of vibe for it at the top levels, we already see in the community there are players approaching that level now. But for the newcomers and the players there, having a platform and the best way to be able to do that is to consistently get games get games in and perform at events where there are metrics that we can track with that. So how is the UKTC going to be looking to support that by making competitive or match player and tournament games as accessible and as important to everyone? Obviously, we have the ranking system. Have you got any views or plans in the future for how that links in with the entire ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, let's just let's just talk about ourselves, right? You know, we're all members of the same community. I want to play a game in 2 hours. I'm not going to be able to, right? I need to get to a store. I need to find an opponent. Um, I want to play an RTT this weekend, but it's sold out and I missed the registration deadline, or I won't know when it is because it's slightly differently because it's a different event. I have one gaming store in half hour in one direction, one half hour the other direction, and I live in the most densely populated part of the country. So if I can't get an RTT in a Saturday, if I can't get a game in tomorrow night or this afternoon, I'm never going to be as good at 40k as I would like to be because I'm not playing as much as I would like to play. I'm not meeting as many new people, opponents, future friends as I would like to do. You know, it's no secret the world's getting more and more isolated as we get more digitalized, and Warhammer's a physical hobby that's played in person. One of the things that I love about the hobby is you got 3 hours. It's like speed dating. You got 3 hours to make a friend. If you don't, no worries. You've had a good game. We're engaging in the game because we like the game after all. But it gives you a default life hack to make a new friend. And tournaments are great for that because it's just chaos. You know, you get put in, here's to 500 people, you might play against somebody that's going to be a lifelong buddy or not. Well over 50% of my friends were Warhammer friends, and now they're just friends. So, you know, all of these things, these positive outcomes that come from play being accessible, are limited when play is limited. So how we're trying to solve that and integrate everything is really key because people just think of us as running super majors, but super majors are a point within the infrastructure ecosystem. So they provide the goal that local events can provide a forum for people to practice towards because you need long-term motivation to keep up a lifestyle hobby like Warhammer. They provide the competitive expression for people that want to measure themselves against each other, but also against themselves over the long term in terms of their improving their rankings, winning their faction championship, and those sorts of things. They provide us with the resources to solve the other problems, which is a very key and underappreciated aspect of them. Like in order to solve the matchmaking problem at a local level, we need more RTTs. To get more RTTs, we need people that can go out and share the knowledge about how to run them in a really efficient way so that local stores that may not be 40k freaks like we are can run them easily with a staff member that maybe doesn't have the training. So we need to be able to develop the training program for them or give them access to a member of staff who can just drop in, parachute in, run the RTT for them. So all of these things require resources, and the super majors provide us with a forum to recruit those resources, whether that's through the ref program and people that want to get engaged in that at the super major level and then filter down to the club level or the store level, or the resources at a more sort of equipment-based thing. So we set up the UKTC TV. we need cameras for that. The super majors provide the resources to develop that, and then that provides us with forums to do other things to solve these problems that we've identified. So the cornerstone of the infrastructure is the event scene, the super majors. Then we have the digital infrastructure, which at the moment, obviously, people know of primarily being the rankings, but also encompasses the website, which is this hub for all the documentation. The documentation is the informational infrastructure. The event pack is replicable. It's a tried and true format. We know it works. If you want to run RTT in a day, you just take our Saturday schedule. Everyone knows it works. So all of these different things are pieces of infrastructure, and what we need to identify is where that infrastructure is not providing a system which automatically solves these problems, and then provide the infrastructure necessary to do that. So that's really the challenge, right? It's easy to say we want 40K to be amazing, and Amazon's going to make it huge and massive and whatnot, but these things don't happen automatically. And our vision is for a world where we've solved these problems, and my job is to make sure we solve those problems.
Definitely makes sense. It's in the vision post, you say it as accessible as football, but also as structured as football, with the leagues, the rankings, the communities, and access to it. How do you see one of the hardest parts about moving house, for example, is going to an area where you don't know anybody around there. And do you see Warhammer and these are readily accessible because there's the infrastructure there, events and communities access to that? You see that all coming together to make it as easy for somebody joining the hobby, even if they're no matter what point of life, just coming in, picking up and shuffling up and play. Like, to call back to the Magic term.
Yeah,
Is
we
that
need
part
a
of
dice
the
terminology for that, don't we? Pick up a dice and roll.
yeah
Let's go.
rolling
I
dice?
don't know. Yeah, I mean, the moving house one is a great example, right? Let's literally role play it, right? You've just moved house, you got to a new area, you know you like Warhammer. England's a densely populated country, and it's the home of Warhammer. There's nowhere else that has as developed an infrastructure as we do, and it's all. And I've just spent 10 minutes talking about how it's not even developed enough, and we're at the head of the pack. So in this role play, we just moved this town. The first thing you do is probably jump on Facebook, search for some local groups, see if there's a local club. Maybe they're not on Facebook because lots of people aren't. So there's a Discord hidden somewhere that's how they organize games. You have no idea what the club's even called, so you're never going to find that. Eventually, you go to a super major, you tell somebody you're from Eton Bray, and you find out that there's a club around the corner. And then you go there, you meet a couple buddies, you play some games, and you're back in the loop of what I just said earlier, where you're not playing as much as you can, but at least now you're playing a little bit, right? But why is that so hard? Why do you need to go through all these steps? It's not hard to develop a platform where all of these things are listed. It's not hard to identify where all the Warhammer players are in the country and notify you about where you may coincide with some others. So, for example, I walked down my little village high street, and being a nosy Parker, I looked in the window of a car that I fancied, and there was a Citadel case on the passenger seat. So I texted the buddy I have in my village, oh my God, we've got another Warhammer player. In my head, I'm like, we can start a club now. It's not just two of us.
Yeah.
There's no reason that guy shouldn't already know that there's other Warhammer players in this village. And I live in a village, right? So it's there's not many of us, but there's a lot of Warhammer players hiding amongst us. So all of those things should be streamlined. This should be easy. It should be, I'm moving to Dumfries. I want to play Warhammer on day 2. First thing I'm unpacking is my army case. I know what the local scene is. There's 5 or 6 different RTTs happening within a short drive of my house all the time. Maybe I'm a security guard, so I'm actually off in the daytimes and I want to play a Wednesday RTT. There's no reason that can't happen. There's loads of people with alternative working situations. So all of these things are, some are happening, hard to find out about. Some are not happening, and there's no reason they shouldn't be, because there's demand and market for them, and it's just there's some sort of friction in the system that stops people getting started. And realistically, I mean, when we talk about football, what we mean is the solution to the problems I sort of started by talking about. It's like no one is not playing football as much as they want to realistically in the UK. Like if you want to go join a club, whether you're an adult, and you spend most of your time down the pub and you've not run 5K in 50 years, you can still probably find a pub league or something, right? There's not really any barriers to engagement with football, and that's not to say anything about the content and digital ecosystems that go around it, right? You could watch a game of football every second for the rest of your life and you still never watch them all, right? So we want Warhammer to be that accessible generally. We're the play organizers, right? I said at the beginning, we prefer to go by the sort of phrase organized play provider. We're providing that forum for people to play, but around that are the sort of downstream effects, right? So you're a 40K coach, you're specializing in teaching people to get good at 40K. Well, that comes out of the events. People need to be playing the game for that industry to exist. Like, you run a streaming channel. I mean, obviously we have our own, but Joe from War Games Live, right? What's he streaming if there's no tournaments? And the more tournaments there are, the more streamers there are, the more streamers there are, the more ways there are for you to engage in your hobby in 10 years' time, when everyone's on universal basic income and no one's got a job anymore. So we're going to have more and more time to fill, and lots of us want to fill that with Warhammer. So the question is how do we put in place the foundations now for the inevitable changes that are coming up?
Yeah, so obviously we already started to see some of those things come in. Like you say, you've got the documentation hub. We've got a very well-defined schedules, policies, and procedures that people can take inspiration from. Can say, if we want to run an RTT, we just take these, day one. And there's the judge program to help build those infrastructures. Over the coming weeks, I'm sure we'll be doing plenty of content about any of the upcoming plans, and we know what the 10-year vision looks like. Have you got any thoughts or anything you want to talk about for the 2, the 3, the 1-year vision now, and where the sort of short-term focus is going to be for making that vision become reality?
Yeah. There's not many people in 40K space that project manage 40K stuff for a living. I'm incredibly fortunate to be in that position, and the company's been successful enough that we have multiple people that's what they spend their time on, right? So the question is what can we do? What can we do well, and how quickly can we do it? Because if we try and do everything, if we try and solve all those problems at the same time, we're not going to do it well. It's going to have speed bumps and all that sort of stuff. So we've got to hit these things sequentially in a way that makes sense. And some of those things take time. Some things take iterations, and when iterations are linked to events, there's no way to speed them up. So I do obviously have a way of translating the 10-year vision into a plan. And as you mentioned, like the TO Talk podcast, or whatever we're going to call it, is a way to articulate that in a more informal manner. The blog will be the formal communication pattern for those things. So please do check those things out, because that's sort of us setting a challenge for ourselves, so to speak. That's where we're sort of making a commitment to Zach when he's in his late 40s rather than late 30s. What do we want the world to look like? How are we going to get there? So we've got the vision, and then upcoming will be the mission, and then the roadmap. In terms of jumping the gun, so to speak, on that, I think probably have to wait until we go into the details later, because it will be a
So
long.
wait and see is the message. And make sure you
Yeah,
are checking out our blog posts regularly, signing up to our newsletter, as this will all be communicated through those channels. And I'm really excited to see where it goes. I'm sure you are as well. So
yeah.
one, thank you for taking time to explain all of this, Zach. Is there any other things you want to touch on or talk about before we
No,
sign off
let
for?
me just close by painting another picture, right? So I started by explaining where we started from and where everyone knows where we're at now, right? Let me just explain how I see organized play provision in the UK, and what success looks like from my perspective for gamers, like Warhammer players. What I see is a world in which everyone in the country can walk out their door, jump in their car, within 20 minutes, no matter where they live, get to a local venue where they can play in a super major scale event, as we know them right now, 200 to 400 players. And I see people being able to do that every weekend at every part of the country. So, basic maths, maybe that's 20 different super majors, 51 weeks of the year. Let's take Christmas off. Um,
Yeah.
you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of super majors every year. And they won't be called super majors anymore, of course, because we'll have semi-regular 1,000+ player events, like LGT scale events will grow with that. And that's the world I want to live in. And it's a world I completely believe is achievable. And I think it's going to happen much faster than people think it is. And it's going to happen much faster than people think it is, for the obvious reasons of Amazon is increasing mainstreaming of the hobby. Um, Games Workshop obviously are doing very well, so they will be pushing for this to come to plus two. And what that will mean that, like, everyone is just going to be engaged in this hobby to a degree that at the moment is a highlight of their year or a highlight of their quarter or 6 months, whatever your current, like, oh yeah, I'm going to go to Warhammer World for your once a year trip, or I'm going to go to the LGT or whatever, like Adepticon's next weekend is going to be a highlight of my Warhammer year. We want to make those highlights as common as possible in a way that is repeatable, standardized, and accessible to everyone. So watch your space, because it is coming. And over the next couple of weeks, we're going to sort of explain a bit more about how we're going to get there.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And thank you for your time explaining all of this. It's been really insightful, and I'm sure everybody is appreciative of it. So, as a thank you for you guys for watching at home, and make sure you are staying tuned to all of our channels, as we said, for that upcoming things. So, I will say goodbye for now. I've been Charles. It's been my pleasure to host you. And thank you, Zach, and goodbye.
Thank you.